What if the reason you're not getting enough clients isn't because not enough people know who you are? What if you don't actually need more followers? You don't need to post more often. You don't need to spend your entire life creating content. And you definitely don't need to become some sort of internet celebrity before people will pay you. Because I think we've been sold this idea that visibility automatically leads to clients. Get seen by more people, grow the audience, get more followers, post every day, make more reels, start another social media platform, and eventually, somehow, all that attention is supposed to turn into money. Except for a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, it doesn't. They're visible, they're busy, they're creating more content than they've ever created before, but they're still wondering where the clients are. And I think there's a really important distinction that we need to make. Visibility gets you seen, authority gets you trusted, and trust is what gets somebody to buy. So today, I want to show you a very different way of thinking about growing your business, one that doesn't require you to build a massive audience first. For years, I believed I needed to just grow my audience. And I did what we're all told to do: create content, promote the podcast, post on social media, get the podcast onto even more platforms, interview more people, just keep showing up. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of that. The problem comes when we assume more visibility equals more clients, because it doesn't necessarily. You can have 50,000 followers who barely know you, or you can have one conversation with exactly the right person who completely changes your business. And I've experienced both sides of that. I've spent years building a podcast. I've created hundreds of episodes. I've spent countless hours creating content. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned is this: the opportunity isn't necessarily in the size of the audience. It's in the quality of the connection. That is a completely different strategy. This is where I think entrepreneurs make life unnecessarily difficult for themselves. We're trying to speak to everyone. We want thousands of people watching, thousands of people downloading, thousands of followers. But if you're a coach, consultant, expert, or service provider selling a premium offer, you don't need thousands of clients. You might just need 5 or 10 or 20. So why are we building a marketing strategy designed to reach millions of people when we actually need a relatively small number of the right people? That's what changed the way I started thinking about podcasts. I stopped looking at them purely as a content platform and started looking at them as a relationship and authority platform, because every podcast has something incredibly valuable built into it: trust. The host has already built a relationship with their audience. People listen to them every week. They know their voice. They know their opinions. They trust their recommendations. And when that host brings you into that environment and says, "I'd like you to meet this person," something very different happens. You're no longer walking into the room as a complete stranger. You've borrowed some of that trust. So think about the difference between these two scenarios, right? Someone sees a Facebook advert from you. They've never heard of you. They don't know who you are. They don't know whether you're any good. So immediately there's resistance. Who is this person? Can I trust them? Is this another person just trying to sell me something. And now compare that with someone's listening to their favorite podcast. And the host says, I've got a brilliant guest for you today. And then you spend 40 minutes genuinely helping that audience solve a problem. You share your experiences. You tell stories. You explain how you think. You demonstrate what you know. And by the end of that interview, they haven't just seen you, they've experienced you. And that is very different. And that's why I believe strategic podcast guesting is one of the most underused client acquisition strategies that is available to experts. But there's a catch. Being a podcast guest isn't enough. And this is where I made mistakes for years. You can appear on 100 podcasts and still generate virtually nothing from them because getting booked isn't the strategy. What happens before, during, and after the interview is the strategy. Most guests do something like this. They get booked, they turn up, the host asks questions, they give some good answers, and at the end they're asked, where can people find you? And they say, I'm everywhere. Find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Here's my website. And that's it. Opportunity gone because there was no journey, no intentional positioning, no next step, and no back-end system. So then the listener thinks, that was interesting. And then the next episode starts. And that is why I don't want you simply thinking, how do I get on more podcasts? I want you thinking, how do I turn a podcast appearance into an authority asset? That's a very different question. And here's something else that people often miss. Sometimes the biggest opportunity isn't even the audience. It's the host. I have seen extraordinary opportunities happen because of the relationship created around a podcast interview. One of the examples I talk about is from when I was hosting the Icons of Real Estate. A conversation connected through the podcast resulted in a commission on a $100 million deal. And here's the important bit. It didn't happen because somebody gave the perfect pitch during the interview. The opportunity came from the relationship and conversation around it. I've personally had another situation where a conversation after an interview led me to being invited to train inside someone's community. That eventually resulted in 2 high-ticket clients and around $16,000 in sales. No Facebook ad, no complicated launch, one aligned conversation. And that's when you start looking at podcasts very differently. You're not thinking, how many downloads did that episode get? You're thinking, who am I building relationships with? Now, here's something practical that you can take away from today's episode. Before you appear on your next podcast, ask yourself, what is the job of this interview? And not, what am I going to talk about? What's its job? Maybe it's to establish you as the authority around one particular problem. Maybe it's to challenge a belief your ideal client currently has. Maybe it's to move someone towards a resource where they can experience your work. But give the interview a purpose, because if you try to demonstrate everything you know in 45 minutes, people usually remember nothing. I'd much rather you become known for one clear idea. This is something I've become increasingly intentional about. One audience, one problem, one message, one clear next step, simple. And this brings me to something I'm quite obsessed with, and that is stories. Facts can demonstrate expertise, but stories make people remember you. If I come onto a podcast and spend 45 minutes saying, here's tip 1, here's tip 2, here's tip 3, you might learn something, but I'm probably going to blend into the hundreds of other experts that you've heard. Instead, imagine I tell you about the 5 years I spent growing my podcast, the things I got wrong, the things I thought mattered that didn't, the opportunities that came from conversations I almost overlooked. The moment I realized the podcast itself wasn't the business, the relationships and authority created around it were. Now you've got something to remember. So stories allow people to understand your expertise through experience rather than simply information. And every entrepreneur has them. The problem is most people don't realize what is a story. They think, oh, nothing interesting has happened to me. It has. You just haven't learned how to extract it yet. And this is another reason entrepreneurs burn themselves out. Every Monday, they sit down thinking, what am I going to post this week? Blank Canvas screen, blank ChatGPT window, blank Google Doc, and they start again. But imagine having a bank of stories from your life, your business, your clients, your failures, your wins, your mistakes, and your turning points. Now you've got intellectual property because one story can become a podcast conversation, an email, a LinkedIn post, a reel, a sales story, a webinar example, or something you use when you're speaking on stage. You don't need more content. You need to extract more value from what you already know. And that's where authority starts compounding. You want to be heard, be trusted, and get clients. So if you remember nothing else from this episode, remember these 3 stages. Be heard. Get in front of the right people. Not everybody, the right people. Then be trusted. Use stories, conversations, and your expertise to demonstrate how you think and what you stand for. And then get clients. Give people a clear path to continue the relationship with you. That is the system. Be heard, be trusted, get clients. And notice what's missing. I did not say get 100,000 Instagram followers. I didn't say post 7 times a day. And I didn't say spend the next 5 years trying to become famous, because you don't need fame. You need relevance, authority, and trust. So the shift that I want you to make, here's the question I want you to think about this week. Instead of asking, how can I get more visible? Ask, where are the conversations that could change my business? Who already has the audience that you want to reach? What podcasts are your ideal clients listening to? And who are the hosts that you genuinely want to build relationships with? What story could you tell that would make somebody understand what you do differently? And if they loved what you had to say, where would you send them next? Because when those pieces connect, podcast guesting stops being another visibility tactic and it becomes a client acquisition system. And if you're sitting there thinking, Karen, I wouldn't even know what stories I'd tell, I've got something for you. I've created my Story Bank GPT specifically to help you uncover the stories you're probably overlooking. It helps you dig into your experiences, turning points, lessons, failures, wins, and moments that shaped how you think, and start organizing them into stories you can actually use in podcast interviews, content, and sales conversation. And it's completely free. You'll find the link with this episode. Start there. Let it pull some stories out of you, and you might be surprised at what you've been sitting on. And once you've done that, if you're ready to go further and actually build the system behind your podcast guest appearances, I've created the Podcast Profits Funnel. That's my 4-part mini course. It walks you through how to find the right podcasts, position your message, use my 5P story framework, and install the back-end journey that turns attention into opportunity. And I've deliberately made it just $5 because this is the first step, not the final destination. So stop measuring your business by how many people are looking at you, and start measuring it by the quality of the conversations that you're creating. You don't need everybody to know your name. You need the right people to trust it. Be heard, be trusted, get clients. I'll see you next week on Podcast Profits Unleashed.
Thank you for listening to today's episode on the Podcast Profits Unleashed podcast. If you're